You are listening to Viewpoints from PlaceCloud. Cultural researchers tell stories of places from around the world. For the full multimedia experience and to support the creators you enjoy, visit placecloud.io.
Think of Smithfield Market, and it's probably the fading grandeur of a Victorian covered market that first springs to mind. If you've walked inside, the smell of raw meat will still linger in your memory. The site's also well known for hosting executions of heretics and political rebels centuries ago, Sir William Wallace and Wat Tyler among them. But for 900 years, the main business of this site was the trade in livestock: cattle, sheep, pigs and horses. Today, the biggest visual clue to this largely forgotten history is the street sign for Cowcross, which winds its way from Farringdon Station into the market square. Historians have shown more interest in the demise of this inner-city livestock market in 1855 than in its growth, profitability and longevity. But by the mid-18th century, Smithfield Market, brimming with whinnying, bellowing, bleating and grunting animals, was an economic powerhouse, a living gallery of agricultural progress and a shop window of product innovation. Milk cows, pigs and poultry continued to be kept in and around London well into the 19th century, but this wasn't sufficient to satisfy the city's increasing demand for meat. Livestock had to be driven into the city, on the hoof, from across England, Scotland and Wales. Located just outside the city walls, Smithfield had been in use as a suburban cattle market since 950 AD. In 1300, it was still set in open countryside, but by 1700, it lay at the heart of a heavily populated commercial hub. By the mid-18th century, the market occupied 4.5 acres and expanded to just over 6 acres in 1834. That's about 3 football pitches. The sale of cattle, sheep, lambs, calves and hogs took place every Monday and Friday. An assortment of horses, a few hundred a week, was also traded on Fridays, as soon as the other animals had been led away. By 1790, London's consumption of livestock was at least 3 times greater than that of Paris, Europe's second largest city. By the 1820s, 1.5 million sheep, 150,000 cattle, 25,000 calves and 20,000 pigs were being sold in Smithfield every year. Cattle sales only peaked at 277,000 in 1853, just 2 years before the trade was moved to suburban Islington. In the 1780s, the value of meat sold in the capital equalled, if not exceeded, that of Britain's total imports from its sugar colonies. The relatively new trades in sugar, rum, tea, coffee, cocoa, cotton, chinaware and exotic hardwoods were no match for London's ancient trade in cattle, sheep and pigs. By 1809, the Smithfield livestock trade was thought to be worth £5 million. By 1832, its annual value had risen to £8.5 million. The trade both benefited from and encouraged advanced commercial practices. Rural landowners and graziers could expect payment to be sent by post the same day their animals were sold in Smithfield. This was made possible by a slick system of credits and promissory notes, but also Smithfield's proximity to local banking houses and horse-drawn postal carriers. This convenience helps to explain why the trade refused to budge for so long, despite rising opposition. By the 1820s, 3,000 cows and over 28,000 sheep were being driven on the hoof through the streets of London every single week. From outposts at Islington in the north, Holloway and Mile End in the east, Knightsbridge and Paddington in the west, and Newington in the south, droves began to converge on the heart of the city until they became a dense swarm. In 1828, a jaded local resident complained that from 11 till 4 in the morning there is one uninterrupted scene of noise and confusion, and that by midnight the area was in uproar with drovers. On arrival at Smithfield, sheep were guided into pens concentrated in the centre and northwest corner of the market. Around half of the cattle were fastened to rails opposite St Bartholomew's Hospital, while the other half stood closely packed together in off-droves near Smithfield bars. In the 1830s, an awestruck visitor declared, "So closely are the droves wedged together, side by side, that their red backs and white horns appear like the surface of an agitated pond, ever undulating and in motion, and a person apparently might walk over their backs as over a pavement. You may suppose with truth that you have before you an area of an acre of solid beef." Once sold, drovers led some animals directly to Smithfield Slaughterhouse District, a hive of compact facilities located behind or in the basements of shops run by independent retail butchers. Other beasts were forced to walk back through the city to be slaughtered close to local food markets. As you might imagine, the task of managing the behaviour of this many confused, frightened and irritable animals in a heavily populated industrialising city twice a week often proved impossible. For this reason, most cities in Western Europe and North America had banished livestock markets to their suburbs or satellite villages by the late 18th century. Paris even managed to do this in the 13th century. But London carried on as the chaos escalated and the death toll mounted. Blood-curdling accidents involving horned cattle and pedestrians became increasingly common in the 18th century and were seized upon by the press. In January 1758, one paper reported that a bullock had rammed a man against a wall with so much force that his brains came out. The following year, an ox gored a woman's eye out on Oxford Street. On other occasions, cattle chased terrified Londoners into shops or smashed straight through their front windows. If you've ever wondered where the phrase, "like a bull in a china shop," comes from, now you know. The Mayor and Corporation of London came in for some heavy criticism for not moving the market, but benefited from vitriolic scapegoating of drovers, the poorly paid men whose dangerous task it was to move livestock from suburban pens to Smithfield and then on to slaughterhouses. These men were called two-legged brutes, and when their cattle ran wild, tossed and gored, they were described as overdrove, to immediately cast blame on their guardians. William Hogarth led the mudslinging, depicting a drover viciously beating a sheep to death in his second stage of cruelty print of 1751. But just imagine the challenge these men faced: the traffic, the interference by passers-by, the startling sounds, the unpredictable animal behaviour. Drovers knew from painful experience that no amount of knowledge or skill could prevent disaster, and they were often the first to suffer. In 1757, the London Evening Post reported that as one of the drovers was untying an ox fastened to a rail in Smithfield Market, it gave a sudden toss with its head and jabbed its horn into the drover's eye, by which means the poor man's eye dropped out of his head. The authorities ratcheted up regulation and punishment of drovers during the 18th century, but the accidents kept on coming. Improvements in livestock carcass weights, meat yield, and distribution of fat were major achievements of Britain's agricultural revolution. These changes took place in the countryside, but London played a crucial role in promoting, evaluating, and directing progress. The quality of the nation's cattle and sheep was judged above all on the appeal of their meat to metropolitan consumers, and breeds which failed to impress were soon ousted from the market square. In the 1720s, Daniel Defoe noted that the black cattle of West Devon were fat and fit for Smithfield market, and sold to the Londoners who have not so good beef from any other part of the kingdom. Smithfield feels so urban today, but for most of its history it was a window onto the British countryside. 21st century Londoners consume millions of invisible livestock, animals raised out of sight and out of mind. That's a remarkably new state of affairs. As problematic as an inner-city livestock trade was, consumers knew where their dinner was coming from and looked it in the eye on a daily basis.